I'm Rachel Davis. I'm 29. And for most of my life, I was the one my family didn't quite know what to do with. They called me the quiet one, the odd one, the daughter who kept to herself and never fully joined the polished performance that was life in the Davis household. My family lives in a town where front lawns win awards and dinner parties come with dress codes. My father is a tax attorney who made partner before I could spell the word inheritance, and my mother runs charity auctions with the same strategy generals use to plan wars. My older brother went to Princeton, my younger sister to Yale. I went to MIT, but they never saw that as the same kind of win. I was never loud or rebellious. I didn't slam doors or dye my hair or date people just to make a point. I just quietly didn't fit. While my siblings practiced their golf swings, I stayed up late taking apart old laptops I'd found on Craigslist. I loved the problem-solving part, how the code followed logic, even when the world didn't. At family dinners, I always sat between someone's elbows, not quite part of the conversation. My dad would ask about my grades and nod vaguely when I said I had straight A's. Then he'd spend 20 minutes discussing my brother's internship at Goldman or my sister's upcoming debate. My mom once told her friend I was into online things like a phase. I used to think if I just worked harder, they'd notice. I joined robotics, won math competitions, even got a scholarship for a summer program in artificial intelligence. None of it made it into the annual holiday newsletter, but when my sister got nominated for Homecoming Queen, there was a custom announcement card sent to our entire contact list. The worst part wasn't that they didn't see me, it was that they had already decided who I was before I had a chance to show them. They saw someone who couldn't hold a wine glass right, who wore hoodies to family photos, who wasn't ambitious enough to chase the kind of power they respected. They told me I was independent like it was a flaw. When I said I wanted to go into tech, my dad said that's more of a side hustle these days. My mom said just be sure not to get stuck behind a screen your whole life. I don't think they meant to hurt me. I think they just didn't have a category for someone like me. I learned early how to blend in without belonging. I smiled through small talk, nodded through dinner, and kept my world separate from theirs. I built things in silence. I solved problems they didn't know existed. And even when it stung, I let their approval go. Because deep down, I started to understand something. Sometimes being invisible gives you space to build something that actually matters. And sometimes, the ones who underestimate you the most are the ones who teach you how to fly under the radar long enough to prove them wrong. By the time I hit high school, the gap between who I was and who my parents wanted me to be had already stretched too wide to hide. My classmates were obsessed with parties and popularity. I was obsessed with solving the hospital scheduling algorithm I'd read about in a tech blog. I built my first working app at 16, a simple system for routing appointment requests more efficiently, but no one in my family ever saw it. Junior year, when college discussions took over every dinner, my parents had already mapped out my future. They spoke of Wharton like it was a birthright and of Harvard as the only acceptable finish line. I applied to MIT without telling them, until after I got in. I still remember the way my father blinked when he saw the acceptance letter. Not angry, just confused. Like I'd chosen the wrong role in a script he'd already approved. My mother asked if anyone we knew had gone there, as if that might redeem the decision. When I told them I was going to study computational systems with a healthcare focus, my father said that was nice, but maybe I should double major in economics just in case. My sister, then a freshman at Yale, laughed and asked if I was planning to become a coder in a hoodie. That was the image they had, a girl sitting alone behind a screen, not someone building something real. They could have paid my tuition in full. Instead, my dad said covering part of it would teach me financial discipline. I worked weekends in the campus cafe and graded intro-level coding homework in the evenings. It wasn't easy, but it felt like mine. I kept my head down and pushed forward. My professors saw something in me, even if my parents didn't. I interned at a startup my junior year, working with a team developing triage algorithms for rural clinics. That was the first time I saw how bad the delay in care could be. People in real pain waiting weeks or months just to be seen by a specialist? Then it got personal. My best friend at school, Maya, lost her mom to complications from a late-stage cancer diagnosis. She'd had symptoms for months, but couldn't get a timely referral. By the time she saw an oncologist, it was too late. I remember sitting in Maya's dorm room after the funeral. She kept saying the same thing. If her mom had been rich, if they had known someone, if the system didn't treat time like it was optional, that night something in me shifted. I'd been building tools because it gave me a sense of control. Now I had a reason to build something bigger. The idea came quietly at first. What if there was a way to connect patients with specialists faster? What if scheduling wasn't run on faxes and voicemails? What if tech could close the gap instead of widening it? I didn't tell my parents. I didn't think they'd care. They were still focused on my younger sister's upcoming internship in DC and how my brother's law firm had just added him to their partner track. I was just the one still doing that computer thing. But even without their recognition, I kept going. I took extra classes, stayed late in labs, worked on ideas between homework and shifts. I wasn't chasing grades anymore. I was chasing a way to keep someone else from losing the person they loved just because the system moved too slowly. I graduated with honors. My parents didn't come. They were in Aspen celebrating my sister's engagement to the son of a senator. I told myself I didn't care, but I did. Still, that moment became a line in the sand. I could keep hoping they'd see me, or I could start building something so clear and so needed that even if they never did, the world would. That choice became the start of everything. I just didn't know it yet. I launched ClearLink Health from the corner of my one-bedroom apartment wedged between a busted futon and a secondhand dining table I used as a desk. By day, I worked as a junior systems analyst for a health tech firm in Cambridge, grinding through meetings and dashboards that no one read. By night, I turned off the world and built my vision line by line, fueled by instant ramen and whatever energy was left in me. Most nights blurred into mornings. I'd look up from my screen and realize the sun was rising and I hadn't moved in hours. I kept a folded blanket near the radiator and sometimes just crashed there for 20 minutes before dragging myself into the shower and back to the office. My savings weren't much, but I pulled together just enough to hire one back-end dev named Charlie who believed in the idea enough to work for half his usual rate. We met in a noisy coffee shop and mapped out the architecture on napkins because I couldn't afford whiteboards yet. When we finally moved into a tiny co-working space, we brought our own extension cords and sat on borrowed chairs with cardboard boxes as desks. The air conditioning broke the first week of July and no one came to fix it, so we coded in tank tops and shorts drenched in sweat passing around frozen water bottles, like some tech startup survival ritual. Every time we pushed a bug fix that actually worked, we clinked iced coffee cups like they were champagne. I still remember the night the first prototype finally loaded without crashing. I was on the floor in socks running the last tests on my laptop, and Charlie was beside me half asleep with a slice of cold pizza balanced on his knee. We just stared at the screen, then looked at each other like, wait, did we actually do it? The third person to join was Lila, a former clinic administrator who had been laid off during hospital cutbacks. She brought more operational insight than the rest of us combined and organized everything from HIPAA compliance to invoice templates. She also made killer boxed mac and cheese, which became our unofficial team dinner twice a week. It was chaos, honestly. We ran out of printer ink every other day, spilled coffee on cables that shorted out half the routers, and once coded an entire weekend on borrowed Wi-Fi from the pizza place downstairs. But we believed in what we were doing. We believed in it so hard it almost made up for how broke and tired we were. There were no glossy pitch decks yet, no launch parties, just a shared Google Doc titled Save Time, Save Lives. That was our mission statement before we even knew we needed one. It lived in the header of every file we opened. That version of ClearLink wouldn't impress anyone from the outside, but from the inside it felt electric. We were building something that mattered in between frozen dinners and sleepless nights, and somehow that made it feel even more real. I pitched ClearLink to 37 investors before anyone said yes. Most of them were men in expensive jackets who nodded politely while barely listening. They smiled like I was a kid at a science fair and asked if I had a technical co-founder even after I told them I built the first prototype myself. One guy leaned back in his leather chair and told me healthcare was too complicated for a young founder without gray hair or military metaphors. Another suggested I find a more seasoned CEO and take a supporting role because that would give people more confidence in the company. He called it a compliment and said I had potential. Some stopped me halfway through the deck to ask about user acquisition costs before they even understood what problem I was solving. Others told me I was clearly smart but lacked presence. One investor ended our meeting by recommending a podcast about public speaking for women in business. Each rejection chipped away at me a little more than I wanted to admit. I knew what we were building was solid. I had the early data, the hospital letters of interest, and the working prototype. But I started questioning whether belief was enough if no one else believed too. Then came meeting number 38. It was in a modest office with no marble counters or espresso machines. Laura Kim, a former hospital executive turned angel investor, asked me one question and then just sat back. She said, "Show me what it does not, what the deck says." I walked her through the tool, the scheduling logic, the security layers, the patient interface. She didn't interrupt. She didn't try to steer the conversation. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment and said, "This isn't just a product, it's a system fix." She wired 250 hoods the next morning. No long delay, no negotiation games. She said she'd waited her whole career to see someone actually address the bottleneck between patients and care with real technology. And she wanted in before everyone else woke up. That wire transfer changed everything. We moved out of the overheated co-working closet and into a space with working outlets and chairs that didn't wobble. I paid Charlie and Lila what they deserved and hired 2 more engineers. We launched a pilot with a small clinic group that had been hesitant before. Suddenly, we had credibility. More than that, we had belief from someone with real weight behind it. That belief caught wind. I got calls from investors who had passed suddenly curious about how things were going. I didn't return most of them. The truth is, Laura didn't just fund the company. She saw me. She trusted that I could lead this thing, not in spite of who I was, but because of it. That was the first yes that counted. Not because it came with money, but because it finally gave me room to breathe and build without apologizing for it. I pulled up to my parents' estate in the same faded gray Honda I'd been driving since grad school. It rattled a little when I parked behind my brother's new Audi and my sister's white Escalade, both polished like showroom pieces. I took a deep breath and checked the mirror, smoothing down my dress from a mid-range department store, the kind I could afford in 5 colors but never bothered to buy in 2. Every year I told myself this dinner wouldn't get to me. And every year I sat at that long mahogany table waiting for someone to ask me something real. Something beyond polite small talk and the careful dismissal they'd mastered so well. The house smelled like rosemary and furniture polish like it always did around the holidays. My mother kissed the air near my cheek and told me I looked comfortable. My father raised his glass from across the room and asked if I was still playing with that healthcare project. My brother launched into his new title at the firm before I even sat down. 14 direct reports, a corner office, and a yacht club invitation. My sister chimed in with wedding updates, name-dropping donors, and guest lists while adjusting her diamond bracelet every 5 seconds. It was like watching a performance one I had no part in but knew by heart. I answered when spoken to. I smiled where expected. But inside I kept wondering how people could be so blind for so long. I had signed a term sheet 2 days ago that valued my company at 9 figures. I had employees, investors, clients in 3 states, and I was still being asked if I wanted help updating my resume. Dinner was 5 courses of strategic conversation. My accomplishments were brushed aside, wrapped in vague nods and awkward transitions. My father asked if I had thought about going back to school just to give myself some structure. My mother offered to introduce me to someone in marketing as if I needed direction. And then came the big announcement. They'd been reviewing family assets, adjusting for growth, planning for the future, and they said with practiced solemnity they decided it was time to cut me off financially. No more allowance, no future inheritance, no access to the family trust. Not until I made choices more aligned with the family's standards. I couldn't even speak for a second. It wasn't about the money. I hadn't touched their support in years. But hearing it declared like a verdict, like a punishment for not fitting their mold, made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt since I was 17. They said it with the same tone you'd use to discuss pruning a hedge or switching insurance providers. Calm, clinical, final. My sister sipped her wine and said she hoped this would give me some motivation. My brother nodded like they were all doing me a favor. I looked around the table and saw nothing but certainty in their eyes. Certainty that I was still the weak link, that I was still chasing a dead-end dream, that this decision was logical and deserved. And for the first time in years, I wanted to scream. Not because I needed anything from them, but because I had built something real, and they didn't even bother to ask what it was. They didn't see me. They never had. My phone buzzed in my purse just as the server cleared away the dinner plates. I ignored it at first, too numb from what had just been said to care who was calling. Then it buzzed again, and then a 4th time, rapid and insistent. That pattern was only used for emergencies. I slipped it from my bag and saw Jess's name flashing across the screen. My father gave an exaggerated sigh about etiquette, but I was already standing. I stepped away from the table but stayed close enough to hear Jess's voice clearly when I answered. She didn't waste a second. SoftBank just confirmed the $40 million. Valuation is official. $100 million pre-IPO. Goldman is celebrating. The words landed like thunder in a still room. I turned slightly and saw their faces shift in real time. My mother's hand froze mid-reach for her wine. My father looked like he'd just misread a balance sheet. My sister blinked twice, speechless for the first time all evening. I kept the call short, asked Jess to send over the details, told her we'd meet first thing tomorrow. Then I hung up, smoothed the front of my dress, and walked calmly back to the table. The silence was so complete I could hear the clock ticking over the fireplace. No one spoke, not at first. Then my aunt, the only one who had ever believed in me, raised her glass and smiled. Well, I think congratulations are in order. Her voice broke the tension like a window cracking in winter. I sat down without rushing, looked around at all of them, and let the moment stretch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I just said what needed saying. I'm still the same person I was 10 minutes ago. Same company, same plan. You just finally know what it's worth. My father cleared his throat like he wanted to respond but didn't have the words. My mother started saying something about how proud she was, how wonderful this opportunity must be. My sister asked how long I had been hiding this. My brother tried to pivot, talking strategy, asking if there was room for family investment. I smiled politely but firmly. The company is already fully backed. The board is in place. There's nothing left to add. My voice stayed steady, not cold but clear. I didn't owe them access just because they finally saw value in what I'd built. They scrambled to reframe it all. My mother said I should have told them sooner. My father said now was the perfect time to reconnect. My sister brought up her fiancé's campaign and hinted at future collaboration. But I wasn't there to feed their revisionist history. I told them I appreciated their sudden interest. I meant it in a strange way. It confirmed what I already knew. Their approval had always depended on what I could give them, and now that I had something they wanted, they couldn't get enough. I set down my napkin, thanked them for dinner, and stood to leave. When my father asked if I'd be attending the family vacation next month, I simply said I'd have to check with my CFO. The silence returned, but this time it belonged to me. In the days after the dinner, my phone filled with messages like someone had flipped a switch. My father wanted to schedule lunch to talk about investment strategy. My mother invited me to a benefit at the country club, saying the chairman would love to hear about my company. My sister sent a long text suggesting we collaborate on a policy initiative through her fiancé's campaign. She added that our family name had always stood for leadership and that Clearlink was a perfect continuation of that legacy. My brother called to say he had contacts at a private equity firm who could help us scale internationally. I didn't respond right away. Not because I was angry, but because I needed space to decide what kind of relationship I was willing to have with them now. The version of me they'd ignored for years didn't disappear when the valuation hit 9 figures. I knew if I let them in now, they would rewrite the story. They'd turn my struggle into a family triumph. They'd make it sound like they'd always known, always supported me, always believed, and maybe they'd even believe it themselves. But I remembered too clearly the silences, the dismissals, the way they used concern as a mask for control, and I had no interest in pretending any of it hadn't happened. When I finally did reply, I kept it short and neutral. I said thank you for the kind words. I said I was fully committed with existing partners. I said I wished them well. I didn't leave room for negotiation. They were shocked, confused. My father called 3 times in a row one afternoon. My mother left a voicemail saying it felt like I was pushing them away. But I wasn't pushing. I was protecting. There's a difference. Aunt Linda was the only one who didn't try to insert herself into the spotlight. She sent me a postcard with a handwritten note. It said she'd always known I was building something important and that she was proud of the way I had stayed true to myself. I called her that night and invited her to visit the office. She showed up with a thermos of tea and a giant box of pastries for the team. She walked around like she belonged, and she did. She was the only one who ever asked what I wanted, rather than telling me what I should be. We sat in my office with the door open, watching the engineers debate button placement on a patient dashboard. She said it felt like more than a company. She said it felt like a place that had a heart. I told her that was the goal from the start. I began carving out space for her in my world, not because of obligation, but because she had earned it. When she asked if she could help mentor some of the women in our internship program, I didn't hesitate. I made her an advisor to the foundation we were about to launch. The others kept trying. A new investment pitch arrived by email. My sister's wedding planner asked if I could be added to the press release as a strategic donor. My mother sent flowers with a card that said, "Our brilliant daughter." But the flowers went to a hospital ward, and the emails went unanswered. I wasn't cruel, I wasn't cold, I just stopped pretending we were the same kind of family. And in doing so, I found peace. Not every relationship deserves a second chance. Some need to be rewritten from the ground up, and some are better left exactly where they are so you can see clearly what never was and choose what truly matters. The morning after the IPO, I walked into our office to find balloons taped to monitors, and someone had brought in real champagne. The valuation had doubled overnight. We were now one of the most talked about healthcare startups in the country. But what made me smile wasn't the headlines. It was the way the team stood waiting, holding coffee cups and bagels, looking more proud than surprised. We had built something that mattered, and we all knew it. I gave a short speech. Nothing rehearsed. I just told them how grateful I was and how far we had come from folding chairs and box desks. Then we toasted with mismatched mugs and spent the rest of the morning talking about where we would go next. A week later, I launched the Clear Futures Foundation, $20 million set aside to fund coding programs, summer tech camps, and mentorship for girls from underserved schools, especially girls who had never seen themselves in rooms like the ones I had fought to enter. We named the first round of scholarships after women who had changed the industry quietly, engineers, researchers, and founders who had been left out of most textbooks. I wanted every girl who received one to know her story mattered, even if no one clapped for it. I moved into a small townhouse near the river. Not flashy, just mine. My aunt helped me pick the furniture. One wall held our first product sketch framed next to the original team photo from year one. I kept the old laptop that ran the first prototype, scratches and all. The press came fast and heavy. I gave interviews but kept them focused on the mission, the software, the patience, the impact. I didn't talk about the family dinner. That wasn't the story I wanted to leave behind. One afternoon, I spoke at a high school career day in a neighborhood where few kids even had computers at home. I stood in a crowded gym under humming lights and told them how I once felt invisible too, how I'd been underestimated, how I had taught myself to build things because no one expected anything from me. Afterward, a girl with curly hair and shy eyes came up to me. She said her parents wanted her to be a nurse, but she wanted to build the machines. Then she asked if it was okay to want more than what people had planned for her. I told her yes, it was more than okay. It was necessary. That night, sitting in my office long after everyone had left, I looked around at what we had created. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't known I was missing. Not pride, not validation. Peace. Real success, I've learned, isn't being seen. It's seeing others, creating space for them, lifting them up while remembering who you were before anyone believed in you. That's the family I chose. The one we build, not the one we're born into. And if I had to lose their approval to find this kind of purpose, then maybe it wasn't really a loss at all.